Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Medical Devices Regulations webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You've joined the presentation in listening only mode, but you'll have the opportunity to submit text questions via Slido, which we will run through shortly. Please note we will not be able to review questions sent via GoToWebinar. It is now my pleasure to introduce your first speaker and chair, Penny Wilson, Deputy Director, Innovative Devices, MHRA.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm joined today by colleagues from across the agency and will provide you with an update on activities relating to medical device regulation. The webinar will last around 90 minutes. It's being recorded, and a link will be sent out to all delegates to access the recording once it's available. The recording will not include the Q&A session. Following our presentations, we will answer as many questions as we're able to in the allotted time. As questions come in, we will be collating them and giving you an opportunity to vote on the questions that you'd like to be answered as a priority. At this point, we will only be answering questions that relate to the content of the webinar, but you're always welcome to contact us. I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Catherine Hodgson, who will take us through how to use Slido. This is the polling platform that we will be using to capture your questions and voting. Thank you, Catherine. Over to you.
Thank you, Penny. Good morning, everyone. As Penny just mentioned, you will be able to submit questions to today's presenters through Slido, and this can be done anonymously if you do prefer. You may submit your questions any time during the presentation. These will then be reviewed by a member of our team who will collate questions to be addressed during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. The questions that are selected by our moderators will be visible to participants, and you will be able to like questions that you would like to be answered, allowing us to answer the most popular questions first. Any unselected questions will not be visible. I will now briefly run through how to use Slido for anyone who is unfamiliar with this platform. When you go to the Slido webpage, which is that first bullet point on the slide just there, you'll notice a blue box at the top of the screen asking if you want to join as a participant. Enter the code MEDDEVICESREGS and press the blue arrow. This will take you to the questions page. You can then type your question into the box and press the enter key to submit it. Our MHRA moderators will then receive your question and will review and collate submitted questions ready for the Q&A session later in this webinar. If you feel at the end of the session your question has not been answered, please do send it through to the consultation mailbox shown on the slide. Thank you. I will now hand back to Penny.
Thank you, Catherine. In this presentation, I will give an overview of the regulatory framework, and then I'll hand over to my colleague, Jalan Hussain, who will take us through the upcoming regulatory milestones. We'll then hear from Catherine on focus groups that we're forming to provide guidance on the interpretation of the new regulations. And our final speaker will be Suzanne Fuller, who will provide us with an update on approved bodies and supply chain. If I could go over to the next slide, please. Thank you. Many, if not all of you, will be aware that in June 2022, we published the government response to the consultation on the future regulations of medical devices in the United Kingdom. The future regime aims to deliver a robust, world-leading regulatory system for medical devices in the UK that prioritises patient safety. The regime will offer improved public and patient safety, greater transparency of regulatory decision-making and medical device information, close alignment with international best practice, and more flexible, responsive and proportionate regulation. Delivering a regulatory framework for the UK is clearly more than providing a set of regulations. We need to provide guidance and maximise the opportunity afforded to the MHRA following the UK's departure from the European Union. The MHRA is committed to playing its part with stakeholders across the UK and internationally to provide an agile, patient-focused regulatory framework that will make the MHRA a global leader in device regulation and will also support innovation. We have identified and are advancing 7 interrelated pillars of activity: translational arrangements and future regulation statutory instruments, and we'll hear from Jalan shortly on this. Stakeholder engagement, this includes things like today's webinar, working with trade associations, working with the International Medical Device Regulation Forum, of which we're a member, working with devolved administrations, and with organisations involved in the development, evaluation and use of medical devices, including patients. The presentation will provide further details on software and AI and our change programme there, and give you some information on our upcoming IVD roadmap and domestic assurance. We are aware that Northern Ireland is a unique position. We are working closely with the devolved governments to develop a future regulatory framework for medical devices across the UK. In October 2022, we published a software and AI roadmap detailing what we intend to do in this space. We will deliver legislative change, guidance for regulation and best practice, the development of processes, and also standards development. We have 11 work packages, 8 relate to software as a medical device, and 3 to AI as a medical device. We have 33 deliverables, and the first tranche of draft proceedings is going through clearance now. We have shared our intent to publish an in vitro diagnostics roadmap. The roadmap will have 5 themes and will cover IVD activities across the life cycle of product development, from science, research and innovation, through healthcare quality and access, to safety and surveillance. Our partnerships team are also working across the devices system. The 5 themes are given on the slide. Sorry, I touched the slide. The 5 themes are given on the slide here. Beyond state-of-the-art regulation, regulatory science, pre-market support, patient safety and surveillance, and emergency pandemic preparedness. Our regulatory framework is closely aligned with the vision of key stakeholders in the UK, including the Life Sciences Vision and the NHS long-term care plan. We are working with NICE and the Office of Life Sciences and the devolved administrations, and we are seeking to deliver a programme for devices that aims to support companies to deliver solutions that address unmet clinical needs. The programmes will take learnings from the Integrated Licenses Access Pathway. Many small companies need support in understanding the evidence that they need to generate for regulatory approval and the data required for economic analysis. So, working closely with NICE and the devolved administrations, we have put in place what we're calling the Innovative Devices Access Pathway. Following the Life Sciences Council meeting in November, we've established a joint working group with ABHI, the Association of British Health Tech Industries, the Department of Health and Social Care, and the Office for Life Sciences to support delivery of a new regulatory regime. We have agreed 3 main areas of focus. First is concerned with exploring recognition of approvals in trusted jurisdictions, for example, the FDA. The second is driving forward innovation. The IDAP programme that I mentioned forms part of this activity. On the IVD side, this is something that we are putting to manufacturers in a joint BIVDA meeting in February. The third is about capacity and building capacity, and Suzanne will take us through the work in this area. The MHRA continues to work with trade associations across government and internationally to deliver a new regulatory regime. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague Jalan Hussain, who will share the up-and-coming regulatory milestones with us.
Thank you, Penny, and good morning to everyone. Over the next few slides, I will provide an overview of where we are now and some of the future milestones. So on the 26th of October last year, we published an announcement to extend the implementation of the future regime by 12 months. This will be achieved by laying a statutory instrument which will amend the standstill date of the 30th of June 2023. Work is underway to develop the wider future regime, with ongoing work to establish the draft legislation, which will reflect the policies outlined within the government response to the public consultation on the future devices regulatory framework. We also announced in October that we would bring into force the transitional arrangements and the new post-market surveillance requirements ahead of the wider future regime, and I will come on to the timeline surrounding this shortly. So this slide briefly outlines the different statutory instruments which we look to lay. The transitional arrangements for CE mark devices are intended to minimise the risks to access by UK patients and assist with a smooth transition between the current and new regulatory framework, while supporting the ongoing safe supply of essential medical devices to the UK market. We are aware of the recent proposal announced by the EU Commission to extend the transitional arrangements for the EU medical device regulations, and I am sure many of you are questioning what impact could that have on the Great Britain market. We are currently assessing the impact that the extension could have on the supply of CE mark devices to the Great Britain market. And although today I am unable to provide any further details on this, what I can do is provide reassurance that we do recognise that patients will only benefit if people are prepared to develop and market their medical devices in the UK. And we want to ensure that UK patients are not put at risk by supply disruptions. Therefore, as I speak through the timelines, please do bear with me and please do bear in mind that this is a moving picture. So moving on to the post-market surveillance, the new PMS requirements will require proactive patient safety monitoring and increased reporting of adverse incidents to the MHRA, improving the ability of both the manufacturer and the MHRA to identify issues with medical devices placed onto the UK market and, where necessary, take appropriate action to safeguard public health. So the statutory instrument on the future medical device regulations will look to bring into force the wider regime. So that will be reflecting the policies laid out in the government response. So this will cover areas such as alternative routes to market and requirements surrounding the registration and conformity assessments for medical devices. So moving on to the timelines for the statutory instruments. We expect to bring into force the transitional arrangements within spring of 2023. We understand and appreciate the certainty that is required by the industry on amending the standstill date before the 30th of June. As a result, we are considering to bring into force the transitional arrangements ahead of the post-market surveillance requirements to minimise the risks of any potential delay, which would impact the laying of the transitional arrangements ahead of the 30th of June 2023. We expect to lay the post-market surveillance requirements within summer of 2023, And under the UK-EU Trade Cooperation Agreement, technical regulations are subject to a 6-month implementation period between the publication of the final regulations and the regulations coming into force, and this is a mandatory requirement. As the PMS requirements constitute as technical regulations, they will be subject to a 6-month implementation period. Therefore, we expect the PMS requirements to come into force within Q1 of 2024. The legislation for the wider future medical device regime will be laid after the new PMS regulations. However, as I mentioned in my previous slide, this is a moving picture and we are working at pace to provide you with the certainty you need, and we'll keep you updated as this work progresses. The future medical device regulations will be subject to a 6-month implementation period before they fully apply, so similar to the PMS requirements. There will be an opportunity to have sight of the draft legislation ahead of it being laid in Parliament. This is part of the World Trade Organization Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, whereby technical regulations are subject to a 60-day notification period and are published on the WTO website. The notification period will apply to the new post-market surveillance requirements, which we expect to be shared with the WTO within spring of this year. The future medical device regulations will also be subject to the WTO notification period. However, as we are currently working through the timelines for its implementation, I am unable to share today when the notification period will commence. We will continue to ensure that you are updated as this work progresses, and we are keen to use this platform as a way to communicate with you on how the regulations develop over time. So moving on to the transitional arrangements. For UK CE marked devices under the current UK medical device regulations, these products will be subject to a 3-year transition period for general medical devices and up to 5 years for IVD products. The same timelines apply to devices CE marked under the EU directives. For devices CE marked under the EU MDR and IVDR, these will be subject to a 5-year transition period. For clarity, CE marked devices can continue to be placed onto the Great Britain market after the 30th of June 2023. Now, this slide briefly outlines the areas to be covered as part of the new PMS requirements. The details are covered within the government response, but bringing forward improvements for post-market surveillance will ensure that there are clearer requirements for manufacturers to develop and maintain a PMS system to identify and implement preventative and corrective measures, as well as reporting of serious adverse incidents to the MHRA. The new PMS regulations will set out the detail on what is required as part of a PMS system and a PMS plan. It will also look to introduce tighter timelines for reporting of serious incidents, and this will align quite closely with the reporting timelines as per the EU regulations, as supported by responses to the public consultation. There will also be detail which sets out what will be required as part of a post-market surveillance report and periodic summary update report, and the frequency in which these reports must be produced and updated. We are committed to enhancing our proactive patient monitoring of UK devices to help us detect safety issues sooner to protect UK patients. There will be some PMS requirements that apply to health institutions and custom-made devices, and we appreciate that this will be a new area for some. And so we will be publishing guidance to support the implementation of the new PMS requirements, which is part of the work that Catherine will speak about shortly. So we are working closely in collaboration with our internal experts and across government departments, as well as our external stakeholders, to develop the wider regime. We appreciate the ongoing support we have received, and we are committed to delivering a regime that is robust and driven to improve standards for patient safety, as well as supporting the attractiveness and favourability of the UK market. The future regime is a substantial reform of the current framework. Our partnerships with industry is key in ensuring that we understand the challenges you face, so that we can ensure that as we craft the new regime, we also understand the barriers that get in the way of patients receiving the products they really need. We are also partnering with other regulators to support access and develop the alternative routes to market, in particular the domestic assurance route, which received strong support during the public consultation. So I will now hand over to Catherine, who will speak about the focus groups.
Thank you, Jalan, and good morning. I will be giving an update on the focus groups that the MHRA will be facilitating in order to help inform our regulatory guidance. Firstly, some background as to why the focus groups are necessary. Guidance accompanies regulation, in this case, the regulations for the medical devices future regime. The guidance will aid with interpretation of the regulations. The amount of guidance for each topic will vary, and this guidance roughly aligns to the chapters of the consultation response where needed. We will be setting up focus groups to test the sufficiency and readability of the guidance, including what it should usefully cover. The MHRA will lead on producing the proposed guidance. Guidance will be drafted so that it is published alongside the laying of the SI that it accompanies. Therefore, the first piece of guidance will be for post-market surveillance, which will be laid later this year. Focus groups are expected to run for the 6 to 8 month period prior to the laying of the SI. Therefore, focus groups for PMS are expected to start in the spring. They will not all be run in parallel to one another, but staggered instead. This slide covers the composition of the focus groups. Each focus group is expected to consist of 10 to 15 participants. Groups are expected to include 1 to 2 representatives from each of trade associations, approved bodies, and devolved administrations, supplemented with in-house experts. We are very grateful to have you on board with this process to assist us with developing the guidance. Of course, patient engagement remains a top priority for us. As such, we will be hosting a separate group of patient network representatives to discuss the guidance. This will help us understand the areas that matter the most to patients. This slide shows an overview of the topics we are proposing to hold focus groups on. Some groups may consist of multiple sessions and some only 1 or 2. This is an initial list of focus group topics, and we may establish further groups if needed. Last week, we reached out to our pool of existing volunteers to reconfirm their interest via email. We will also reach out to stakeholder groups asking for nominees to fill remaining spaces in the groups. Where interest in participating exceeds available places in a group, we will look to offer other ways to participate, such as inviting comments via email rather than in a group setting. We're very grateful for your support and look forward to hearing your views as part of these groups. Thank you. I will now pass on to my colleague Suzanne, who will be giving an update on approved bodies.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, my name's Suzanne Fuller and I'm the Interim Head of Approved Bodies and Proactive Market Surveillance at the MHRA, and I've been asked to provide an update on where we are with approved bodies for medical devices and what steps we're making to ensure ongoing supply of medical devices to the UK market. So first question is, where are we now with approved bodies? We currently have 4 designated approved bodies. As you can see from the slide, they have a mixed scope of designation across the different categories of medical devices and IVDs. If you want to see the detailed scope of each approved body's designation, this is listed on our website, so you can find it there. One of the first things to say is that we recognise there is a need to significantly grow capacity in the approved body sector. We've already begun that work, with DECRA being the first new designation and the recent expansion of scope for assessment of IVDs for UL. However, we know that there is a lot more to be done, and this has been particularly challenging to achieve in parallel with changing regulatory frameworks in both the UK and the EU. It's important to note that the requirements for approved bodies for medical devices are set out in both the UK medical device regulations and more specifically in Regulation 920/2013. The latter regulation is quite prescriptive about how we must assess, designate and monitor approved bodies. This means we can only designate organisations that are able to demonstrate compliance with these regulatory requirements. That said, we're taking a pragmatic and flexible approach to designation. We want to avoid creating unnecessary duplication whilst ensuring that we build a strong and independent UK system. So an example would be the requirement for UK approved bodies to be a distinct legal entity based in the UK, whilst permitting the sharing of resources and personnel with conformity assessment bodies in a wider global group. As I mentioned, Regulation 920/2013 sets out the requirements for assessment, designation and monitoring of approved bodies. I'm conscious that perhaps to the outside world it may not appear that there's been much activity in this area. However, the team are working very hard on processing the applications that we have received. And I wanted to explain to you the process by which we designate approved bodies. I should add that due to commercial sensitivities, I can't comment on the status or progress of individual applications. However, if any manufacturer does want to know the current status of an application, they should liaise directly with their organisation. So there are broadly 6 stages to the designation process, the first being pre-submission. At this stage, myself and the team will spend time meeting with and discussing with organisations who wish to apply to become an approved body what our expectations are, what they would need to submit to support their application and to ensure they understand the requirements for being an approved body. Once an organisation has assembled all the relevant information, and this can be quite a substantial amount of documentation, we will agree a date with them when they submit their application and that supporting documentation. The MHRA team will then undertake a completeness check of the documentation to make sure that everything that is required has been submitted. And this, it's in Annex 2 of the regulations, specifies the documentation that they must provide to us. Once we're satisfied that all relevant information has been provided, we will then move into the detailed application review phase. This is where the team undertakes an in-depth review of all the documentation and the competency records. These competency records enable us to assess whether an approved body has the correct expertise required to undertake the conformity assessment for the types of medical devices for which they have applied. We will also review all their procedures, organisational structure, and how they intend to manage applications for certification. If necessary, we will have further meetings with applicant organisations if we require further clarification from them or if we think we need more information. On completion of our detailed application review, we will then move to undertake a designation audit. We audit the applicant organisation against 4 key areas. These are the organisation and general requirements set out in the regulations. So this relates to things like the legal structure, liability insurance, impartiality, and the financial sustainability of the organisation. Secondly, we audit the quality management system for the applicant approved body. We will then look in detail at the resource requirements. This relates both to the capacity of the applicant approved body and the competence of the personnel, and how they manage that within the organisation. This is to ensure that the approved body has appropriately qualified personnel and also has the capacity to take on the additional work that will arise from the UKCA scheme. And finally, we will assess the processes and procedures for undertaking conformity assessment. This is from the point of application by a manufacturer to an approved body right through to certification decision and then the ongoing surveillance activities to maintain those certificates. The application review and designation audits are usually quite an intense process, and this is our opportunity to clarify any areas that we've identified where we have further questions and assess how effectively these processes and procedures have been implemented. Stage 5 is the post-audit phase, where the auditee will respond to and address any non-conformities raised during the designation process. Once these have been satisfactorily addressed with supporting evidence provided, we'll undertake a follow-up assessment to close out those non-conformities and verify that any changes that have been required have been appropriately implemented. Once the follow-up audit has been completed and successful, a recommendation regarding designation will be made to the MHRA approved body panel, who will take a decision regarding designation. So that's just a high-level overview of the process that we go through, and hopefully it gives you a sense of the detail and the rigour that we apply. The question that we're probably asked the most is, how long does it take? It's very difficult to answer this, as it depends on a number of factors, including the scope for which an organisation has applied, the number and the nature of any non-conformities raised during the audit phase, and how long it takes to close out those issues. So, what's in the pipeline? As you can see here, we have 3 organisations who are in the post-designation audit phase, 3 organisations in application review phase, and we're engaging with several other organisations as part of the pre-submission phase. And all the organisations who are in the application process are applying across the spectrum of device categories, so covering general medical devices, IVDs, and active implantables. As I mentioned earlier, I can't go into specifics, but hopefully this gives a high-level view of the number of potential approved bodies we have in the pipeline. Colleagues earlier have provided an update on the timescales for updating the UK medical device regulations. Those new regulations will include new and enhanced requirements for approved bodies. These changes will come into effect at the same time as the other requirements in the regulations, so the later implementation phase. Any new organisations that apply to become an approved body after the regulations have been, the updated regulations have been implemented will be assessed against those new requirements. However, those that are already designated will not be required to apply for redesignation when the new regulations come into effect. So essentially their designation will roll over. This should enable designated approved bodies to focus on implementing the requirements of the new regulations without the need to go through another in-depth designation process. However, we will assess the approved body's implementation of any new regulatory requirements through our usual surveillance activities. So turning now to ensuring continuity of supply of devices to the UK. We know that there are concerns regarding ongoing supply of medical devices, and the reasons for this are complex but include capacity issues within the European Union system, the challenges faced across industry in transitioning to the new EU regulations and the knock-on effect that that's having for the UK market, as well as the limited current capacity within the UK approved body system. So my colleague Gillian set out earlier the transition arrangements that we'll be accepting CE mark devices for a longer period. So this hopefully will help to ease some of the concerns. And as Gillian also mentioned, we've been keeping a watching brief on developments in the EU as proposals for extending their transition timelines have taken shape. For manufacturers with CE mark devices, we'll be assessing how this fits with our own proposed extended transition arrangements. In the shorter term, some manufacturers have been applying to us for exceptional use authorisations. This process enables devices that don't have a valid CE or UKCA mark that are critical to supply to be placed on the market for a limited time whilst they're able to come back into compliance and receive their certification. However, we've also been working with colleagues in the Department of Health and Social Care, with our industry partners, trade associations and approved bodies to try to understand the scope and scale of the challenge in terms of ensuring supply. A key part of this is gathering data and trying to understand what the implications might be of any specific supply issues. So working with colleagues, we're exploring what additional and or alternative mechanisms we might need to deploy in addition to the transition arrangements above to ensure continued supply of devices in the UK. And we'll continue to engage with industry on this moving forward, and we will update you as we have more to say on this. Thank you very much.
On behalf of MHRA and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of your day.